and the descendants of the giants plan to enslave humankind. I think he has a message he wants to get out, and very interested in hearing what he's got to say. So, with that said, I will just go right into and introduce Gary Wayne. Gary, are you there?
I'm here, and I am so excited to be with you tonight, Dino. Looking forward to a terrific show, and I think some of the things that we're going to talk about is going to, I think, resonate with your audience and certainly pique their curiosity on many things.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I've come to find that the whole story behind the Nephilim and the giants of old, and especially coming from the Bible and stuff, which is kind of the take you. You're a Christian, right? So you kind of have some different kind of beliefs, and so you dig a little bit deeper into the Bible than I would when it comes to all this kind of stuff. So I know you got a message that you want to get out there, and I would definitely tell you to feel free to say it. Be true to yourself. Say it how you want to say it. Get the message out. With that said, what actually started you off in writing this book? I mean, did something happen? Were you on a crusade from the very beginning to get a message out there? I mean, how did this all start with you?
Well, I'm a real history buff. I'm a real mythology buff, and I'm a real prophecy buff. And so what I decided to do was, because there's so many different narratives in the Bible that has to do with prophecy and so many intricate sort of parallel stories that go along, I wanted to log it. And as I was logging all these different narratives and files and getting ready, maybe to perhaps someday write some books on these prophecies, I came across, the giants in Genesis 6, and then I came across them again, in the Old Testament after the flood, which was very, very interesting, and even into the time of the Exodus. And then, of course, and for people who may not be familiar with biblical prophecy in the New Testament when it refers to the end times, we take heed from Jesus, who talks about what his second coming will be like at the end of times, and he says that these days will be like the days of Noah. And so when we talk about Noah, that's before the flood, and then 350 years after the flood that he also lived. So what was going on immediately before the flood, what was going on immediately after the flood, and how is that relevant to be like the days of Noah as the end times will be? Plus, there's references to demons and angels and other really curious references that were in the New Testament. Plus, you've got the abyss in Revelations, and you've got the war in heaven in Revelations, and you've got Armageddon. So what I thought I would do is I would hopefully, cut my craft on my first book and write what I thought was going to be the shortest book I would ever write, and just connect Genesis to Revelation. And what it turned out to be was an 800-page book, and I took 25% out to get it published. But what happened along the way was I started, as I asked more questions in the research and started digging into it, more doors were opening up, and I started to get, I made linkages to other religions and other mythologies and found pretty much an identical story going on as what's talked about in the Bible in Genesis, as well as in the end times. And then what really kicked the door wide open in terms of the path that it turned into a conspiracy book was I started to get information and documents from the secret societies and what they believe, and all of a sudden that took it in a completely different direction. And so, I've been doing research on prophecy and writing the first book all total for over 30 years, and with writing this book more like about getting closer to 20 years with the promotion of it. So, and one of the things I wanted to do with this genre of the giants and this conspiracy aspect that I was also bringing into it was I wanted to bring some credibility to the genre. And so what I wanted to do was really have a lot of research and show it in my book and keep as much of the speculation out as possible. And so I use their documents, their information, and I don't try and manipulate it or twist it. I let the secret societies or the Gnostic religion or Zoroastrianism or the Popol Vuh, from the Kisha Maya, whomever I'm using for a source, I let them speak for themselves and just let it line up with what the Bible says. Now, I do measure everything for the Christian audience out there. Everything that I find out there is I measure it to see how it's consistent with the Bible. And so I don't get too far down the sort of the rabbit hole on this, but I certainly use those other sources for context. And so what I've done is I think I've created the most comprehensive book on this subject, and I've got one narrative which nobody else has done. Everybody else tends to write on small slivers of this whole genre. And this genre not only includes, Bible prophecy in the end time, but it's also got a little bit in there on the alien mythos and a whole bunch of other things that people might be interested in.
Wow. So yeah, there's you cover a heck of a lot in this book then, for sure.
Yeah, I call it a 6,000-year connect the dots investigation into, how the descendants of the giants and the secret societies and the mystical religion, how they grew up together, how they partnered with the descendants of Cain and the fallen angels to corrupt the antediluvian world, and how they've been planning to do that ever since, and how and why they're planning to bring on the end time.
Okay. Well, I definitely have plenty of questions, like why is it taking so long? But I'm sure you've got your point of view on that. But how about that? Let's start from the beginning then. Who are the Nephilim? Who are the ancient giants that you refer to?
And that is a real critical point for credibility on this whole subject. But just before I answer that is from a Christian perspective, is the secret societies and the descendants of giants and the polytheist religions and their leviathan of organizations would bring about the end time as quickly as possible, and have been trying. But we're taught in the Bible and in prophecy that until the restrainer is removed, that time will not take place until the ordained time. So that's why it's taking so long to answer that question quickly. Okay. Who the giants? Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. You answered. Okay.
Terrific. And so the Nephilim are the offspring of the sons of God in Genesis 6. And we read in Genesis 6 that the sons of God, which are also known in Hebrew as the Ben Ha-Elohim, or angels as they're defined when you get into Job as to who the sons of God are, these are angels that go to human females that copulate with them and take wives and many thereafter to create a super race of demigods. And these demigods were known as the Nephilim, and they were giants. In the original race of giants, they had the immortal spirit. And so God steps in also in Genesis 6 and limits lifespan after that takes place, because that's a violation against corruption according to biblical doctrine as to what the fallen angels did. And limits life to 120 years, and it takes many generations for this to take place, but that immortality stays in place with the first generation, even though their bodies weren't immortal. So that's who the Nephilim are. They're the sons of the rebellious angels that rebelled against God in the Bible. And we find that this is a most similar story that's told on all continents, in all religions, in most cultures around the world. And whether or not you're talking about the Daitria out of India, or the Aswans out of India, or the Anunnaki out of Sumeria, or the Titans out of Greek mythology, or the many giants that are known by different names, literally hundreds of different names around the world, it's telling the same story, just that in the polytheist perspective, or the multiple god religions, and all these ancient religions had a religion. So it was either a single god or it was many gods, gods of the pantheon, is that the gods of the pantheon went to the human females and they copulated with them and created the demigods. And so these were giants as well. So this story, doesn't matter where you go, is told over and over and over and over and over, and that can't be a coincidence. And so when we talk about demigods, this is a reflection of what we see today, just to bring it forward to this time, and so that people understand that this mythos continues from all aspects, whether it's Christian, or non-Christian sources. And so if you look at Superman or Batman or any of these superheroes, this is a reflection of that time. This is a reflection and an allegory of these heroes of Genesis 6, because they were called both in the Iliad and other Greek classics, and in Ovides, which was a Roman sort of parallel of the classics that were written later, or Ovides in Metamorphoses was the name of the book. They were called heroes as well. And so in Genesis 6, they're called heroes of old and men of renown. And it's not a coincidence that they're called heroes, just as the Anunnaki giants and kings of the ring were also called heroes. And in the ancient definition of hero, it's understood a little bit differently than it is today. So when you understand the definition of the ancient word hero, it means the offspring of the gods and a human. And they were called demigods. So this is how hero has changed over the time. But when it's overlaid onto, let's say, Superman, we have a very, very much a parallel story in a modern allegory, because if you dig into Superman, his father is El from the house of El. Right. And if you're familiar with biblical and religious language of gods, El is either an angel or a god, depending on which religion that you're in. And it's a shining one, which, of course, angels are shining beings, as were the original offspring of the angels. So this goes back to the house of El. So this is of the house of angels, as the allegory would go here. And Superman, he has this logo that essentially has a stylized inverted pyramid, because pyramids are all part of the same sort of allegory and legacy and history that's on all continents in pretty much all cultures, as we're seeing more and more and more of. And it's got this stylized S in there, which is more like a snake. And that's really, really important when you start to understand what the angels looked like who produced this offspring, and therefore what the offspring looked like, because they look just like them. And that's where all of the snake and dragon imagery comes from, is the appearance of the angels and the appearance of the Nephilim. And so the seraphim angels, and for the Christian audience, seraphim comes from Isaiah 6, depending on which translation that you're going to use, seraphim or seraph. And it's in reference to this order of angels called the Watchers, or the Grigori, for those who are familiar with the mythology of the giants from outside biblical sources. Right?
Oh, yeah. And many would call the Watchers aliens, too, but I guess
that's the alien, ancient alien story. And again, that is identical to what the Bible says, only that they look at the aliens as being not as great of an intelligent being or evolved being, or however you want to look at their mythos, but they tell the same story. They just don't raise them to godlike status. They're just this evolved sort of society and culture, and come from several planets. But if you get into Sitchin's mythos on it, what he writes about is that they actually mate with human beings, and there's two different levels of these Anunnaki. One he calls Igigi, I believe, and the other one is the Anunnaki. So, again, identical story. Right. But what I wanted to get to just before I let you jump back in is that these seraphim angels, they had the face of a snake, right? They had the face of a viper, and so did the first and early generations of the Nephilim. And so if you have wings on a angel that has the face of a snake, you have a dragon. And if you take the wings off, you basically, and the legs and the feet off, you basically have a snake. And this is relevant from the fact that if you look at the serpent in Eden, we don't hear about the description of what a serpent looked like before Eden, only afterwards, where it crawls on its belly. And so, as other sources would dictate, and particularly the Gnostic Gospels, they'll talk about a serpent as being as big as a camel in the time of Adam, and that some had wings and others had arms and hands, but they both had feet, and it was a very highly intelligent animal, only second to Adam and humans, and that this animal was absolutely punished for taking part with the fall of Adam in Eden. And so if you have one with wings, you now have a snake with wings. That's a dragon. And, of course, you have the regular serpent with legs and hands. And in ancient times, whether it's a crocodile or it's a serpent or a dragon, they were all considered the same animal and being.
Huh. Okay, so that's technically who the Nephilim were.
Yeah, and that will also answer why there's so much dragon and snake imagery in all the ancient societies. That again is part of this legacy of a common heritage and a common story.
And you might have a different time frame being Christian and stuff. I'm not sure if you believe in the creationism. But I mean, how long are we talking time frame wise where the fallen angels came and copulated with the human females and the Nephilim were born? How long?
So I am a bit of a Christian contrarian, and I'll put that on my biography, and it's on my book as well. So there's a few different ideas as to when this happens. In terms of the rebellion, we certainly know when they went to human females, which was, between it was the sixth generation of Adam. But when the rebellion actually happened, because it was the Watchers or the Grigori or the Seraphim angels which governed the antediluvian epoch and after the rebellion. So a standard sort of understanding from a Christian perspective that most people like to do to try and put a square peg into a round hole, so to speak, is they say the rebellion would have happened either just before Eden or just after Eden. But I would look at it a little bit differently. So from a Christian contrarian perspective is if I look at what it says in Genesis 1 in the days of creation and the Eden account, and I get into the creation of the humans and the plants and everything, it is a distinctly different story than Eden. And I can't reconcile the two stories as being the same. So I'm one of those people who does not believe the Bible contradicts itself. So if that's the case, and there are contradictions, and that is the case, then I believe they're talking about two different stories. So there's a gap there, in my opinion, between day 6 and the Eden account. And would also answer who Cain married and who he was afraid of and why he had to have a mark and where he got his wife from and why he built a city and high walls if there was just him at that point in time. It starts to answer a whole bunch of different questions if you look at that as being differently. And I like to give this out on a lot of shows that if somebody wants to know the differences between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 on the creation account, then just get a hold of me through my website and I'll shoot you an email on it. And I'll give you that information. Secondly okay. You could also look at translating Genesis 1 to Genesis 1:2 with a gap in it, as what Christians would call it. And again, I have a handout on that if people want it. So if people say, when did the rebellion happen? I would lean between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, because how you look at the narrative and how you translate that from Hebrew, it can equally be translated that after in the beginning the earth became void and formless. And I can get into the detail on that if you want, but that's a little bit hard on Christian doctrine here. But if people want that for a handout, I can send it to you. So what I don't do is I don't get hung to the 6,000 years between Adam and today. What I look at is there's two possible gaps there.
Okay. And you can get into whatever you feel like getting into. That the more info the better. But so when the fallen angels actually came down, and I know I'm going back again, and we'll get to the very end here with talking about the end of days and what's going on there. But when they actually came down and copulated with the humans, I mean, they took this form, this reptilian form, you're saying, when they were born, and so is this the same that we're talking with the giants? Are they the same thing?
Yes, so they had the original giants had faces of a viper, and so if you can imagine these elongated skulls that people in this genre will talk about.
Yes.
And there's two different types of elongated skulls. One is that's a human size that's been banded to give you that shape to emulate what a Nephilim would look like. But then there's these other ones that have about twice the cranium volume.
Right.
And they also don't have that suture that connects our human skull together, so they're a completely different sort of animal. So you can imagine this snake-like, huge skull. And they had slanted eyes and eyes that glowed. They had high cheekbones, and they had protruding chins, and thin lips. And if you want to get a bit of a glimpse of what that might look like, is go to a King Tut museum, and there's lots of them on display all the time, whether it's in America or Canada or England or wherever, or look up and go on the internet and get a picture of Tutankhamun's father, Akhenaten. And that is circa 1250 BC, and so this is way after with diluted bloodlines, and you're seeing a snake-like face. So you can imagine what this looked like. And they also had long necks. And Anakim, which are a race of giants in the Old Testament after the flood, the definition for Anak or Anakim is long necks. So they also had these long necks. And second, what else they looked like is they also had very white, ruddy skin. And they had either, for the most part, either red hair or blonde hair. And if they were red-haired, they had green eyes, and if they were blonde-haired, they had blue eyes. Of course, that goes into this whole Aryan mythos as well, and it all intertwines into that as you peel back that onion or go down that rabbit hole. And above that, these weren't just taller than normal humans. Like, they weren't 8 feet tall on the original ones. And in fact, if you're talking about Goliath in the Bible, and most people look at it as him being about 8 feet or just above, if you used a royal cubit because he was a king of Gath, and all the kings would have used the royal cubit as opposed to the common cubit, which they've used to calculate the 8-foot size of Goliath, he would have been more like 11.5 feet. And Og in the Old Testament would have been more like 15 feet tall. But the original Nephilim is thought to be 20 to 40 feet tall. So these are monstrous beings, and they just weren't tall, slender. They were stocky, strong, horrible-looking beings. And if you look at the normal sort of height to breadth ratio of a human, it's on average about 3 to 1. These ones were about 2 to 1. So they're incredibly stocky. But as the Titans were referred to, they were very adept and fleet of foot, and so very good at being a warrior and able to dominate humankind with such tremendously overpowering characteristics to them.
Wow. So, but they were definitely humanoid in appearance. 2 legs, 2 arms.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's why you see, like, even with the Egyptian dynasty, why the cobra and the snake is so popular. And in Sumerian mythology, the kings were called serpents and the gods were called serpents. And you've got all of the serpent mythology that goes through the Quiché Maya ancient history and back to the Toltecs and back to the Olmecs and back before the flood. And that's why you've got all of the dragon parents of China were all dragons and snakes. It doesn't matter where you go. It all goes back to the dragons and the fallen angels and the offspring that they had.
Right. No, yeah, definitely see that in every culture and history. So, yeah, it's 100%. But let me ask you a couple questions here, too, and see what you have to say about it. What happened to the fallen angels once they, because they're not around right now. I mean, or are they? I mean, what actually happened to them? Did they reascend? Are they still around in a different form?
So some are around and some are imprisoned. So all of the ones that did have, and a third of the angels rebelled at the time. So there's a lot of angels.
And do you know exactly how many fallen angels there were? Does it say in the Bible exactly?
No, there's some guesses at it, but I mean, we are talking, I don't know whether we're talking billions, but one can imagine hundreds of thousands anyways. So, I mean, this was a significant population. And somebody may correct me on that, but I don't believe there's an exact number given anywhere that I've been able to find, and certainly not in the Bible. But what we do know is a third of them rebelled, and there are a lot of them. And so the ones that did violate the laws of creation and did have sex with human females, they were able to do that, but it was a violation against the laws of creation. So after the flood, those ones were imprisoned in the abyss, as well as if anyone after that, because there's only three ways you could have Nephilim after the flood. One of them is that there was a second incursion. If those ones had sexual violations against humans, then they would be in prison as well. But not all fallen angels were. Now, in with the fallen angels in the abyss are the worst of the demons. But again, not all of the demons, because again, in the New Testament, you see Jesus dealing with demons quite regularly as they possess them, and there's a very famous set of demons that are often used in horror movies called Legion.
Yeah.
And there's many of them, and they were afraid that Jesus was going to send them to the abyss before the judgment, right? So and he does, and he sends it, and they go into these pigs and they go off this cliff. But so we have demons and fallen angels that are still impacting the world today.
Well, let me ask you real quick.
They will continue to it until they are rejoined with the angels that will escape out of the abyss that's talked about in Revelation in the end time. And so they are working with the descendants of the Nephilim and the secret societies and the mystical religions and the descendants of Cain to bring about the end time to this day.
Okay. Interesting for sure. So you say some of the fallen angels were sent to the abyss, and
yes,
there they are kind of together with demons, but where exactly did the demons come from? And when we talk about the fallen angels in the abyss, are they what we would term ghosts or anything that we kind of connect to on the other side, be it psychic?
No. When you're in the abyss, you're not communicating with anybody, and when Satan or Hellel or Lucifer, however you want to refer to him, will be put into the abyss after Armageddon for 1,000 years, he can no longer influence the earth as well during that 1,000-year period until he's released. So, who are the demons, and how does that relate to ghost spirits? I can make a very, very quick connection there for you.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So, first thing I want people to know from a Christian perspective is that when you die, you sleep, and you will sleep and until the time of the resurrections and the time of the judgment, depending on where you're going to fall on that. So it's not the bodiless spirits of humans that we're talking about. We're talking about the bodiless spirits of Nephilim, and particularly the immortal Nephilim of the first generation. And so, as I said earlier, their spirits were immortal because they inherited the book of Enoch, which is not in the Bible, but a very good contextual reference to learn about the Nephilim, because Genesis is very stingy on it, is that their bodies weren't immortal, and so as time went on, their bodies grew old, they got injured, they got hurt, and some of them were killed, and some of them committed suicide to bring on death because they were in so much pain. But their spirits did not go to sleep. and their spirits were not permitted to go into heaven, and they're forced to stay in this physical realm. So when we see ghosts and things like that, that is these bodiless spirits. And if you go into Greek mythology and if you go into Taoism, they talk about these ghost vagabonds in Taoism, and they talk about these hero spirits in Greek mythology and history. And once one of these heroes would die, the people would be haunted by this spirit because it was so upset at dying and losing its physical body, and that it was still immortal, that it would come back and haunt and make the people's lives miserable. And that's where the word hero worship comes from. It's from the bodiless spirits of these original Nephilim who used to rule over these people coming back after their bodies died. And so these are the creatures that also possess humans, although fallen angels have an ability to possess as well, but you would know that particularly in the paranormal term as an avatar, because they more or less control as opposed to possess, as opposed to a demon possesses because it needs a body. A fallen angel doesn't. It can transform into anything that it wants to be.
Okay, so they do have power to connect with our side, right? I mean, they're not technically totally trapped in the abyss.
Well, only the ones that are outside the abyss can affect this physical world. As I said, not all of the demons and not all of the fallen angels were locked away in the abyss. The ones in the abyss can't communicate with us. But there's an ongoing effort to always try to get these beings released by the other side. And that's how they try and get through with things like portals and things like that. They're trying to find a way through to get these out, but you can't.
And who's trying to get them out from the other side in the abyss? The other fallen...
Well, everybody from the secret societies to the mystical religions, and they've been trying right from day one after it happened. And if you take Babel as an account, most Christians will understand the translation of Babel as confusion of languages after the people were dispersed. But Nimrod, who was the king of Babel, and he partnered with a fellow named Hermes, which is really connected here, but to keep it sort of short and sweet, after the dispersion, Nimrod goes to Chaldea and takes the 7 sacred sciences, which is absolutely key to understanding the antediluvian epoch and understanding what happened at Babel and what's going to happen in the end time. But he takes these 7 sacred sciences that they were redeveloping at Babel to Chaldea. And then the Akkadians come from the Chaldeans and from Nimrod as you follow this sort of descendancy. So where I'm going with this is Babel is also an Akkadian word, and that makes sense when you understand, the genealogy is where they came from. And Bab stands for God, and Bab stands for gate or gateway, and El stands for God, as I covered earlier. So one of the things they were trying to build was a pyramid that was going to be a gateway to bring these gods back, and I think they were trying to have them recopulate with human females to create more demigods again. And so when we look at pyramids again, that is, again, one of those constants that's around the world. And in ancient times, whether it's a tower, which they call the Tower of Babel in the Hebrew translation, or a ziggurat or a pyramid, they are the same structure and understood to be the same structure in ancient time. And it's representative of a mountain. And if you look at the mountain allegory, there are 7 sacred mountains of the antediluvian world where the Watchers ruled from. Some say 4, but more commonly it's at 7. And I know there's even some people think there was 9 civilizations before the flood, but generally it's 4 to 7. And these 7 mountains are very, very important because, again, it's part of that whole mythology of these sacred mountains. And one of those mountains in Hebrew mythology is where, and as recorded in the book of Enoch, is where the fallen angels first went on the first antediluvian incursion. 200 of them went to Mount Hermon to copulate with these human females. And if if you get into Armenian and into Mesopotamian mythology about Babel, because there are many, they viewed Babel as a recreation of Mount Hermon.
And why did they have to go to the mountains to copulate and to?
They didn't always. I mean, but that's where the first incursion happened.
Okay.
But as I say, mountains are very, very important in mystical religions around the world. Just as you have the gods of Olympus, as an example, the gods used to live on these sacred mountains and rule from there.
Okay. Well, man, I tell you, Gary, you've got. Every time you talk, I've got about 7 different questions going in my mind, and I'm like,
That's why I love talking about this.
Oh my God! It's like, which one should I go to first? If I talk about this, it's going to take us off course. But then, I mean, there's just so many things here, man. So the pyramids, you believe that that's the way they. What are your thoughts on the Great Pyramids, and why aren't they being used today if they're capable of being used today?
Yeah, and they may not be capable of being used today, or the knowledge perhaps has been lost. What we do know, though, is there are more than one reason to create these pyramids. Right? One is a possible portal. And, of course, portal is part of the fairy mythology, which is all interconnected on this. And it's also part of the alien mythology, which, again, is connected in here in the various different rabbit holes that you want to go down. Mm-hmm. So pyramids were created for the most part to honor the gods. And let me back up and just talk just quickly about these 7 sacred sciences. These are the knowledge that was taught to Adam in Eden as what Freemasonic and secret society documents and doctrines teach. And this knowledge was taught to Adam, who later taught it to Abel and to Cain. Of course, Cain kills Abel, and Cain is ostracized, and then Adam also then teaches to Seth. So you have these 2 lineages in Genesis, the Cainite lineage and you have the Sethian lineage. Now, Cain then teaches this knowledge to his son Enoch. And again, there's 2 Enochs in these 2 lineages. One son of Cain, one is the Holy One that gets raptured to heaven of the Sethian line. Now, Enoch develops this knowledge to a whole level and develops a sun-worshipping religion called mysticism. And he also develops a way of keeping this information separate and away from the poor and away from the non-ennobled. And so he creates secret societies and initiatory religions to house all of this and to continue to develop the sciences. Hence, Enoch is a significant patriarch to the founding of Masonic societies at that point in time. And when we get further into this development, we learn that the 5th science is called geometry, but inside the craft, which is secret societies and particularly Freemasonry, the 5th science is called masonry. Now, these sciences are developed for a number of reasons. One is to lead people away from God and into another religion. 2 is to dishonor God and not give him respect for being the creator of the universe and creator of all things. And 3 is to honor their pantheon of gods of the fallen angels and of Satan. And so they created many megaliths, and they take credit in the secret societies of building these antediluvian megaliths, whether it's Stonehenge, which again they'll credit inside Freemasonry to Enoch, son of Cain, and or the pyramids, which they also credit to Enoch's knowledge and to the religion and the Masonic societies that they developed. And so these were to not only honor the gods, but to also dishonor God. And they will also write that some of these were, like the pyramids in Egypt specifically, were erected to honor a society that they knew was going to be wiped out by the first apocalypse, so the apocalypse of water with the floods. They knew it was coming, and they built these megaliths so that their society would not be forgotten. And what's so very important about these sacred sciences and these secret societies and how they partnered to corrupt the whole world is that they raised their level of technology and society to a level that, according to their records, was as great or greater than what we have today. And so when we talk about linking in prophecy the days of Noah to the end times, we're talking about a significant society that was able to do things that we can't even do today, a.k.a. just the manifestation of these megaliths or pyramid structures or temples and things that we see around the world and below the sea, or Machu Picchu, or wherever you want to go with this, to a level of technology and engineering that we can't do today.
Wow, yeah. Well, and again, a million questions, but we'll eventually get to the end times here. That we'll get to that.
We may not tonight.
Who knows? I don't. We will. I definitely want to talk about it because we'll get to that point. But man, there's a couple questions, but we'll stick with the secret societies, I guess, since we're talking about that. Or maybe let me ask this question: the Nephilim, the descendants of the Nephilim today. They are here, right? And in what form are they here?
Right. So in the antediluvian epoch, they usurped the kingships. And they were the ones who enforced the mystical religions and the sciences and the violence and everything that came on. And then after the flood, they again get control of the kingships. And through these kingship dynasties, these bloodlines and descendants continue all throughout time. And so early on, and just to give a few names so that people who may know a little bit about history might recognize it, you might refer to it as the Mitanni dynasty in the Middle East and Mesopotamian. You certainly have the Nimrod, Akkadian dynasties coming out of there. You had the Hittite dynasty, which is a little bit lower level in terms of the ennobled bloodlines. But the Amalekite dynasty and the Egyptian dynasty, those were the big ones, right? And that came down, and then all of the kingships, for the most part, came from these families ongoing, and they intermarried to keep their bloodlines pure. And so when we get into modern times, you're talking about diluted bloodlines because they still have to take in over the millennia some sort of not totally outside bloodlines, but let's just say something like Lady Di, who was descended from the Stuarts. She was presented as a commoner as an example, and she marries Prince Charles, but she's not totally outside the bloodlines, but far enough away so that you keep this introduction of blood so that you don't get genetic defects. And particularly O negative tends to be one that they like to match up with a heavy RH negative, as most people tend to believe that the royals or the royal bloodlines have. So if you follow the royal families, most of those dynasties have these bloodlines, and there are some very powerful people who aren't on thrones that are also part of this sort of descendancy. And so they, again, when you get into peeling back the onion on this, and they are on record, and they have kept track of the genealogies that link them all the way back, not only to the flood, but before the flood.
Okay. So the bloodlines have mixed enough over the years that, you really just looking at them you could never tell that they
you
are
can't
the descendants.
Tell, yeah. But they do believe that they still have enough in the blood that either through forward engineering or backward engineering you could create a new super race, which is what the Nazis were talking about doing, only through backward engineering and try and get racial purity, and something called Vril. I don't know whether you're familiar with that term, Vril, but it's a Rosicrucian term. Because, again, secret societies are always interrelated on everything that we're going to talk about, just as their mystical religions are with the Nephilim. And what Vril is a potency in the blood, and some people think it's the RH negative bloodline that will sponsor a future race of super beings. And it's also a belief in a doctrine that's based in race purity and bloodlines. And so when the Nazis were talking about creating the super race, the Aryan race, that's because they overlaid on all of their religion, something that they expanded on from theosophy, which comes out of the Gnostic religions, this sort of Germanic Nordic overlay and this flavor on it. And they actually take their descendancy back to Aryans, who they believe came from Thule, which is the sort of Aryan Atlantis, just to connect that. And they believe they were ruled by giants. And so that's what they were trying to connect in their belief system, because this stuff is all connected and it happens over and over and over and over. So whether or not it's the bloodline that is the marker, your audience may have heard some other terms out there that will also identify how they believe they can identify themselves and why they continue to intermarry. Just as families of the pseudo-blue bloods in the U.S., they tend to intermarry, like the Rockefellers with other Carnegie families and Morgan families, and they work for the Rothschilds, and they also intermarried into there. This is part of that whole sort of belief system that they intermarry to keep the bloodlines pure and keep renewing. So you might also hear the term coming out from them called the gene of Isis.
Yes.
And
yes.
This is a belief that they have, where they believe that they all have in this superior race this gene that comes from Isis, because Isis is one of the mother goddesses that they raise the human females to in the pantheons to be a goddess, but it's the sort of like the human female that was married to create these giants. Okay. And so that's also what they say is the root word for Genesis as well. Mm-hmm. Now, this is reflected in another term that they call the spark of the divine. And that's why in these polytheist and Gnostic religions, they have to have the world come together with one government and one universal religion so that they can bring the spark of the divine together and evolve into gods. They call it vibrating to another level of consciousness. This has another allegory that you can track and connect back to secret societies, and a lot of Americans will be quite familiar with a couple speeches George Bush Sr. gave, and Jr. as well gave a couple, but particularly on the New World Order after the, I'm not sure it was at his inaugural initiation or it was around the Gulf War, but anyways, he talked about 1,000 points of light in the New World Order in the same speech. 1,000 points of light is talking about this gene of Isis, the spark of the divine, or this bloodline. This is the language they speak in. And when you understand their language, you'll understand that they put things in front of us all of the time, and they talk about things all of the time because they know most people don't understand what they're talking about.
Exactly. No, and that's the group with the owl, I'll just say that. But do the descendants actually know that they are descended from the Nephilim? Are they aware of it?
Well, the ones that are part of the more pure bloodlines, they're told right from the birth, and they try and perpetuate this. A lot of people think that they have a changeling quality and changing the lizard people and things like that. That's a lot of speculation on that aspect, and there's nothing to prove that. But they know their genealogies, and that's why. And I've got one posting on there about Prince Charles. He actually takes his genealogy back through Vlad the Impaler and Dracula,
really?
Which is again all part of this mix. Yes, and most people don't realize that the House of Windsor is part of the German Hanoverian line, and that the Hanoverians are very much connected to an organization that was reassembled in 1408, as I recall, called Ordo Draconis. Or the Sarkani Rand, which is to recreate the pursuits of Thoth, which was the seven sacred sciences, to continue the development of that and the religion, but more importantly, to keep the dragon bloodlines on the thrones. And of course, Vlad the Impaler was initiated into that organization, and his father was Vlad II, and so he was known as Dracul, which is Romanian for dragon, and when you put the A on it, that's son of a dragon. So when we talk about a dragon allegory and a fairy allegory, those are very, very important, not only from an allegorical and bloodline perspective, but also how they play out in real life throughout the ages.
Wow, so dragons actually existed and roamed the earth at one time.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. Okay, so getting back to the secret societies, why? What is their purpose, and why are they trying to get the ones that are in the abyss, the Nephilim who are imprisoned, out? What kind of plan are they trying? I mean, there's so many secret societies, you just said, but what is their end goal with this?
Well, their end goal is to, as we'll see it play out, is to bring about the end time and introduce their false Messiah, which will be the dragon Messiah. But you have to sort of go back a little bit and say, okay, so why would they even want to do that? Mm-hmm. So you go to the title of my book in terms of what they're trying to do: enslave humankind or wipe us from the face of the earth. I think they would keep enough around to serve them, as what the Blackheads did for the gods and the Anunnaki in Sumerian mythology. But we're considered lower level beings and mundane, so we're only there to serve them in terms of how they would view things. And the reason why is that this goes right back to what we're talking about in the angelic rebellion, and then what outflows from that. And so everything that happens to humankind from Adam on is directly interconnected with the angelic rebellion. And so what happens with Adam, he's created as a vehicle to raise humans in the future world to above angels. And that's why it'll say in the New Testament that we're going to judge angels in the future world. Probably the fallen ones for the things that they've done to us over the thousands of years. And so the fallen angels, they take this as even more of an insult. And what they were hoping to get out of the rebellion was they know because they were around God. They knew that they probably couldn't defeat God. In fact, they knew they couldn't defeat God when you get right down to it, so why do it? What they're hoping for, as it comes out in fairy allegory, which is really significant, is that they're hoping to have an Gnostic religions, which it's very much connected to the fairies as well. They were hoping that they would show enough cause and determination that God would permit them to have their own realm, a different universe where Lucifer or Hell-El or Satan, however you want to call him, right, could rule in that universe. But that's not going to happen. And so when Adam was created to be raised above them at some point in time, they decided to take revenge on humankind and prevent that from happening. A, to either support their case, or B, to just ensure that they're going to reap destruction on the people that God had created to be raised above them. And so that's why you see the first revenge, and I'll cover that off in detail in chapter 13 of the book. It's called Lucifer's Revenge, is Lucifer goes into Eden and either becomes a serpent or avatars through the serpent, or coaches the serpent to have Adam and Eve, and then Adam eat from the tree of evil so that they could be like God and have the knowledge of good and evil, and that God is preventing them from having that knowledge. And so that's the first revenge, and that's the fall of Adam, and he gets ostracized out. The second revenge is the Genesis 6 incident with the fallen angels creating Nephilim, and they're there to usurp government, kingship, and enslave humankind and have them revolt against God and therefore justify the rebellion, or at least fight with them in enough numbers to lead as many as they can astray. And, of course, that happens in the antediluvian epoch, and therefore we have the flood. And if we look at Genesis 3, connecting some of all of this, we learn that right after Eden, you have a very odd set of verses where it's talking about the serpent and Eve, and that the offspring of the serpent are going to be at the odds all throughout this age with the offspring of Eve, because she's the mother of all living, as she's called there. And so this is has been going all the time. What they're trying to do is prevent humankind from being elevated in the future world. And so they want to bring on the end time. And here's the thing. The demons know they can't win, and the fallen angels know that they can't win. But the humans don't know they can't win. And so they are deceiving through secret societies and the mystical religions that they actually can win. And this is that dualist belief that you see coming out. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking science fiction or Gnosticism or Eastern religions, where it's good versus evil and everything's in balance, yin and yang, or in Star Wars, where you have the good force and the evil force, right? And the force is the universal life force, which is mysticism. So they believe that if they can get humans to fight for their freedom in the end time, they're going to try and convince them that humans can win, but they can't. And that's the great deception that they're doing with all who follow them. Because after the resurrection, after the resurrection of Jesus, it was all over.
Right.
And the reason why it was all over is because they didn't anticipate the resurrection. And so Jesus in 1 Peter goes down to the abyss and talks to the angels, the fallen angels in there, and the worst of the demons that we talked about a little bit earlier, and basically tells them, and this is while he's still in the grave, and he's just about to rise on the Sunday, that your fight is over. With the resurrection, humankind will be raised, and we're going to cumulate this so that we can fulfill the number of the Gentiles, and it's going to be on God's time. And when the restrainer is removed, we'll bring this to a head in the end time.
Wow. Okay. So again, though, I mean, if they cannot overthrow God, I mean, if it's not possible, why are the secret societies trying to get them out from the abyss?
So that's why you have to go back to what I said is that the demons and the fallen angels whom they speak to in these secret societies, at least at the Rosicrucian level and higher, they're deceived to believe that they can win. So if you look at what, let's say, Albert Pike talks about in Morals and Dogmas, and I don't know whether you're familiar with that book or your audience is, probably they are, but he talks about Lucifer, which is the god and the great architect of Freemasonry, and Adonai. And he talks about Lucifer as God and Adonai as God, and that's what they call the God of the Bible, is Adonai, and they are equal, right?
Right.
So that they're teaching through the secret societies and the mystical religion, because they're one, that God is no more powerful than any of the other angels. And he is the evil God and the God of oppression, and that Lucifer is the God of light, and they are the children of light and the children of knowledge, and the evil God of the Bible, as they call him, tries to keep people enslaved in the physical world and in ignorance, whereas Lucifer provides knowledge and is going to let them evolve to gods. That's what they're told, essentially, in a very quick nutshell, in mysticism.
Okay. I mean, I get that side of it, between, the fallen angels and Lucifer and Satan, but us as in real human beings on the planet who are in charge of these secret societies, are they just using us to get them out, or do the people in charge of whatever secret society is attempting believe that they can really use them for a purpose?
Well, everybody that is in these secret societies and in these mystical religions are humans and the descendants of the Nephilim that, look like humans. They actually believe they're going to win.
Okay, so we're talking the secret societies actually are a majority of the descendants of the Nephilim themselves. So
only at the higher levels. So
okay,
so if you look at Freemasonry, just to explain it, because again, you said there are many, but I can give a little bit of infrastructure here. So Freemasonry is one of the societies that most people are familiar with, but it's not one of the higher ones. So you have a lot of people, you have to be invited to Freemasonry, and after that you're going to be initiated into the the doctrines of mysticism over time, even though as long as you believe in a God, it doesn't matter which one you can join if you're invited. So there's going to be non-ennobled people, and there's going to be some purebloods in these organizations as well. Mm-hmm. And then as you are initiated through the various degrees, 33 in the Scottish Rite or third degree in the York Rite, mm-hmm. You rise to the level of third degree York, 33rd degree Freemasonry, which is at depth level, right?
Right.
At that level, you are considered enlightened, and you are told the secrets that will overturn supposedly every preconceived notion, as they like to boast, and that you are initiated into Luciferian doctrines. You understand who your God is at that point in time. Now, the ones that show the most talent and the other ones that have some bloodlines, they're going to go into the Illuminati group, right? So when you're illuminated, you now move into the Illuminati, and from the most brightest there, but most likely the ones with more bloodlines, more ennobled bloodlines, you'll go up to the Rosicrucian level. And at the Rosicrucian level, you're going to have probably half of those that are very, 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 very pure bloods representing the families well in the Rosicrucian level. And underneath the Rosicrucian is where most of the strings are going to be pulled. But above the Rosicrucians, you've got like the Committee of 300, then you have the Grand Druid Council, which narrows it down. Then you have the Council of 33, and then you have the 33 families. And so if you're talking about Bilderbergers, mm-hmm. or if you're talking about Bohemian Grove, or if you're talking about Skull and Bones, they all operate underneath the Rosicrucian level. Okay. So, for example, Skull and Bones would be a Illuminati reporting organization, right? Just as the Rhodes Scholarships would be. That's under the Illuminati, but they still report to the Rosicrucian order. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right. Yeah, very, okay. So,
Did I explain that well enough in terms of what we're talking about?
I'm telling you, I'm trying to wrap my head around all of this, but I think what we really need to get down to, too, is who is Satan, Lucifer, what have you? Who is he, first of all?
Well, he is one of the greatest beings ever created by God, and was charged with great responsibilities, but according to the Bible and to other accounts, mm-hmm. Whether it's Gnostics or whether it's from the Popol Vuh or in fairy mythology or wherever you go, there's a Lucifer counterpart. Mm-hmm. And so pride enters in to his affairs, and he rebels. And so he takes a third of the angels with him. So this is who Lucifer is. He is a cherub, and he's also seraphim. And he's also called the devil, and he's also called the great serpent, and he's also called the dragon, right?
Right.
So he has all of these labels, and he's also known as the adversary, and he's the one that I believe is permitted to continue to do what he's doing, because, I mean, God could at any point in time mm-hmm. stop Lucifer or the fallen angels, but he permits them to continue to test humans after the fall, right? So there's a concept in here that people need to understand when we're talking about these immortal beings, because they can't die, which are the angels, right. And something called free choice. So when God created all of the beings, and including the angels and the many orders of angels, mm-hmm. They were created immortal, and they don't have ability to die. So they didn't have a choice in that whatsoever to accept immortality and to follow the laws of God. Mm-hmm. The only free choice they were able to express was to follow God or rebel, and a third of them rebelled. So when humans are created, they are not created immortal. They are going through this process of free choice to choose God or not, and to choose to follow his ways and to choose immortality. And then the ones who do not, they will die, and they will die in the second death, except for those humans who take the mark of the beast. They don't get that luxury, and immortals can't die, and we're told that they're going to burn in the in the fire for forever and ever. And so once they've lost the rebellion and they're not going to get their other realm, all they're trying to do is destroy as many and as much as they can until their time is finished.
Wow. Okay. So where? I mean, I'm asking you simple questions, kind of, but there's deeper answers too. Lucifer, Satan. I mean, hell. Is he here on Earth? Spirit form, human form.
He can take any form that he wants. Any being that comes from the heavenly realm or the spiritual realm, they are spirit in.
I'm trying to get Gary back here. Let's see if he answers. It looks like it may be having the same kind of trouble as yesterday. But somebody told me that Skype went out nationwide, and they were saying it could be because of the hurricane or something like that. But yeah, I think the same thing's happening. Dave in chat is saying, "Uh-oh, welcome back." Yeah, I don't know, man. We will see. This was such an interesting show that you know what? Let me try one more time and see if I can get Gary back, because man, I do want to continue to talk to him. Because, man, this is some interesting stuff, that's for sure. Here we go. I'm going to call. It looks like he's on again, so we should be able to get a hold of him. But, man, yeah, the Nephilim. Gary.
I think I'm back.
Yeah. I don't know what happened there. Maybe Skype again. It's...
well, especially when you talk about Lucifer, anything can happen.
You know what? Yeah, I think we were talking about that right at that time. So who knows? That was very, very odd. But you are back, so we can...
I am back.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I don't know if it was a connection, a Skype issue, but nevertheless, you're back. And I was going on here saying, you know, how many different questions, how many different directions we can go with this, and I'm trying to keep it on par with the book and all that, and what we're trying to get to when we get to the end time things here. But
I think you're asking terrific questions. Oh,
thanks. Well, my God, I could throw in 100 other questions, but it's kind of off topic a little bit, because I mean, the whole issue with God and you know, casting out the angels and actually letting them do what they want to do is just you know, I try to wrap my head around that and why he would allow what goes on to go on, and that leads me to a question too: who are we? And Earth isn't the only place that there's life, unless you believe that that's the truth. I mean, the universe as a whole. You know, I mean, God, there's got to be life, you know, everywhere. I mean, you know, teeming, I would believe. And if that's the case, are the fallen angels everywhere? Or are they just isolated to this planet that we're on right now? You may have a totally different, you know, way of viewing all of this.
Yeah, I think that there's a possibility that there could be life, you know, around the universe, or there may not be. I think you could go either way on that sort of argument from a Christian perspective. And certainly when we talk about Lucifer and Job, I mean, he's talked about traveling to and fro in this whole physical realm, which includes the universe, and doing his business. So one presumes there's things going on. You know, God can have as many creations as he wants from a Christian perspective.
Right.
Right. So
yeah,
I would never try and get into God's shoes and say he can do this and he can do that. I mean, if he is who I believe he is, who my faith says he is, then he can do anything he wants because he's omnipotent. So there could be other civilizations that you know, we're not aware of, or another possibility is as a lot of Christians believe. I think there's a mix in here that's a little bit greater than what Christians will talk about. Is they look at the alien phenomena and the alien mythos as just a demonic and angelic deception, and I think it's probably a little bit greater than that. I think they're involved on it, and I think that the alien deception or revelation, depending on how it's played out, is going to have a significant part in the end time to help bring the world together and unite, as they do in all science fiction once they find out we're not alone in the universe. But there's also an aspect that I think goes back to prehistory that we have to be very, very aware of. And that's why for me, it's important to learn about prehistory, because if we go back into prehistory and we get into how they corrupted the whole earth, not only did they was the earth corrupt because of violence, which is the sort of standard theology that comes out of churches and teaching, is it was a greater corruption of that. Because if you remember the great technology and the sciences we were talking about, I'm talking about the corruption of the whole world. I'm talking about the corruption of plants with changing the genome and cross-pollination and whatever else you want to do to change the plants. I'm talking about the same thing going on with animals and humans in terms of DNA manipulation and copulating with other species and creating these absolutely fabulous, if I can use that term, creatures of mythology and religion, whether or not you're talking about, centaurs or cyclops or goat-like animal hybrids, and on and on and on in prehistory about these animals. I believe that this was all going on. And when we get into fairy mythology, I think there's even more interesting creations, because most people don't know that in the fairy mythology and the mythos, it falls into 4 categories that is very much connected to one other aspect I didn't cover off earlier that is a standard part of almost all religions, all cultures, all continents, kind of like the snake, kind of like the flood, kind of like the giants, kind of like the pyramids. But this is the 4th classification of fairies. So you've got 4 classifications of fairies in the fairy mythos. Okay. You have the proud angel that rebelled, that came from other planets, and took his followers with him. They came and they bred with human females again. These are the earthborn fairies, and this is most predominantly recalled in the Tuatha De Danann mythology out of Ireland, because they're a part of the Atlantean mythology as well that most people aren't aware of. But the Tuatha De Danann were known as the fair folk and the fairy people. Okay, so these are also giants. The 3rd class was the daemons or the demons, which are the bodiless spirits of the original generation. And then you have an interesting group called the elementals. And the elementals are these little people, okay? Yes. And then the little people are actually separated into 3 classifications. And whether or not you're talking about Native American ones, they have 3 different names for the same classifications in their religions and legends. But the more common ones that we would know of would be gnomes, and leprechauns, and little people are the 3 classifications. And then underneath you have a whole bunch of other different subclasses underneath those 3 main sort of groups. And so when we look at popular literature, whether or not it's so intrigued the Ring Lords, the Lord of the Rings, or Shakespeare and Midsummer Night's Dream and Atlantis and all these other little stories that they have, they are reflecting memories of these creatures that were created in the antediluvian epoch, and they were reprobate spirits as well. And so again, there could be demons coming from these ones as well if they weren't permitted to sleep or go to heaven. Now, within the gnome classification, this is one of the root words for Gnosticism that I keep coming down to, is the religion of the secret societies. And also, the gnomes were also the ones who kept the genealogies and guard over the great ancient knowledge in fairy mythology. But within this classification of gnomes and goblins and other ugly ones is this small, interesting little being that has flying machines that come out of portals known as shays, or fairy mounds, or fairy domens, or out of the water, which is why you have fairies in King Arthur, which is another rabbit trail. But where I'm going with this is they kidnap people and they do DNA experiments on them because they're trying to boost their DNA makeup and their bloodlines, and they kidnap people for a fortnight. Then they are returned and they have no memory of them, and they have this great knowledge in these spaceships. These are known as the Grey Fairies, and in Scotland they're called the Grey Neighbours, as an example. And I'll give a description of this fairy abduction in the book when I'm talking about the alien mythos and how it all connects into the Genesis 6 conspiracy. And if you didn't know it was a fairy abduction, you would swear it was a gray alien abduction because the descriptions are exact. Right. And so I think this plays also parts of the surviving beings that also survived the flood. And this whole idea of portals or interdimensional play that you have in the fairy mythos, it's there in the alien mythos as well. And beyond that, you also have this sort of whole idea of about aliens having more than one kind, right? So if you get into science fiction, if you're in, say, Star Wars, you've got that big furry guy, was it Chewbacca, and all these other fantastic beings, and so one wonders whether Chewbacca is like a Bigfoot sort of connection or ogre connection as a memory. But you see all of these fabulous different types of people that are in there, including lizard people. So I don't know whether there are actually lizard aliens or not, but it's interesting. It has that snake connotation that goes back to the Nephilim and the fallen angels. So there's a connection there, and I do believe that there's a whole array of this working together, whether it's a deception or they're from other planets. You decide what you believe, but I think there's enough going on there that suggests that something's going on.
Okay, so you kind of leave the door open to either side of it, whether it be actually another species like a gray aliens.
Yep. When you look at the great deception of the end time, and you look at the Antichrist raising his throne and his empire into the heavens, and you see the angelic third angels being thrown down to the earth at the midpoint of the last 7 years, you have to imagine that there is going to be some sort of war going on in the skies and the heavens, as it's been recorded in the Vedas and elsewhere in the past, that there's going to be this perception that we're fighting for our chair at this galactic table, so to speak, and we have to fight for our freedom with all these other species. Is it real? Is it a deception? Or is it somewhere in between? We don't know. But what I do know is it's going to have an impact on the end time.
Yeah, that's getting back to the elementals. That's actually the very first time I've ever heard of the fairy folk and the gnomes and being referred to as part of the maybe the deception, the alien, the gray alien, something like that. That's actually the first time I've ever heard that, and I'm not sure if that's something you bring out through a lot of the Bibles, Quran, all that kind of stuff that you've read in the past. Is that where you've pulled that from?
Yeah, I basically pull the little people out of occultic sources, secret society sources, Gnosticism, ancient mythology, and other religions.
Okay.
And again, it's so interesting, like in the Lord of the Rings, which, I'm a fan of watching the movies, and I love science fiction and everything else, but I like to understand sort of the allegories and the information that they're loading in there. So you have this antediluvian story where you have hobbits and you have elves and these other peoples that were fighting with humans against these ogre-type beings, and you have these magicians flying around that have wands and everything, which is the seven sacred sciences of mysticism as it was reflected out of the Magi out of Chaldea that we talked about earlier, out of Atlantis, and so that's the religion sort of aspect of it. And the Lord of the Rings is, if you get back into Sumerian mythology, is the ring is the ring of the Anunnaki kings or the Nephilim kings, and those kingships are issued out of Nippur by the gods to the Nephilim. And again, the round table of King Arthur with the fairies is reflecting the same sort of story. What's interesting about the Lord of the Rings is two things. One is what makes it kind of unique in fairy mythology and other mythologies that are designed to hold the secret history is that Tolkien overlays the Norse fairy mythology as opposed to sort of the British Isles and Central European, and that's why it has a little different flavor, and that's one of the reasons why I think, other than it's a really good story, that it got so much attention. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of The Lord of the Rings, you see all of these different beings going away on a boat, right?
Right.
And on water, and that is an allegory of the flood, and what they say is now is the time of man.
Yes.
Right? So after the flood.
It's so interesting how there seems to be a little bit of that mythos and the, in all of Hollywood right now, literature, movies, whatever. So it's we put a little bit of that in everything we do. And I don't know if that's on purpose or if it's just, something that
It's too rampant not to be... to just be a coincidence. It has to be planned, and it's the same stories that just keep being revolved over and over and over and over and over and expanded on. Whether it's vampire movies and going back to the dragon bloodlines and Dracula and how all that connects, or fairy tales, or science fiction with the mystical religion and the dualist sort of religion and fighting for your freedom and world government that comes from it, and on and on and on. Everything we look at, for the most part, I know that's a bit of an overstatement, but so much of what we look at, we're just absolutely inundated with their secret history, their allegories, and their religion. And it's like they're preparing us to for the acceptance of what they're going to reveal to us as we approach the end time.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, I'd be accepting of any kind of truth out there right now. I hate being led blind and not knowing, being shown a lot of this stuff. But anyways, how about monsters and I know I'm getting off a little bit, but since we're talking about elementals, the mythos of the all these creatures and stuff like that in history, could the Nephilim have taken the form of vampires or other types of creatures, even nowadays, like Bigfoot or the Dog Man? Could they have taken this form, and they technically were real monsters in the past and still even to this day?
Yeah, so one of the big sins of the Nephilim after they lost their immortality is they started to drink blood. Okay. And so they started to drink blood to try and extend their shortening lives and to expand their mental faculties. And even to this day, blood drinking is part of the rituals of the secret societies,
right?
And at the upper levels. And then at Babel again, Nimrod, who is also considered the first grand master of Freemasonry after the flood, and Babel was his first manifestation of the utilization of the seven sacred sciences to honor the gods of the pantheon as they did in the antediluvian epoch. He also introduces blood drinking and starts to associate and intermarry with the giants afterwards. So we have this sort of continuing idea of this blood drinking concept, which is a Nephilim concept, and why blood drinking is not permitted in the Bible is closely tied into this whole sort of ancient blood drinking mythology. And so when we look at the idea of the creation of the blood drinking vampire, we have a couple of scenarios that we need to look at to tie this together back to whether it's a female vampire or it's a male vampire, and also goes back into what we were talking about in terms of Tuatha De Danann and Shakespeare earlier, because all of this sort of interties. So let me just sort of walk you back a little bit. So in the allegory of Midsummer's Night Dream, you have the king of the fairies known as Oberon. And he is married to somebody who is named Titandes, which is the female name of a Titan or a Nephilim, right?
Right.
As a species, right? And so this is the Elbe gens, or the Grail race, that derives from the Tuatha De Danann race, as the fairy folk is what we talked about. And so if we look at Oberon, that now derives from a couple of ancient sources and Tuatha De Danann sources. So you might look at the Aryan source of Oberon as being Ubar, or the Scythian Sarmatian version as being Upper. And if you go back into Tuatha De Danann, it is the Upper with a P as opposed to the BAR in the Aryan one, but that just shows you how close the etymology is on where Oberon comes from.
Right.
And so what Upper is with the Tuatha De Danann, it derives from the more ancient, because they're connected to the Scythians and the Sarmatians, to the Scythian Sarmatian name, also known as Upier, which is the tradition of a vampire. And Upiers were night operative vampires. Just as Vlad couldn't go out at night, he had pale skin and green eyes and red hair, and was initiated into the mysteries at the Mystery School of Solomon in Austria, as an example. And so when we now move back into connecting Vlad and Dracula into blood drinking and into the Upiers, and we understand that this was a night operative vampire or witch, we also will now connect something called Strigoi, which is Romanian for witch, and was a popular name for a vampire, and it comes from Latin strix, which comes from screech owl, and screech owl comes from which was a word that is used in Isaiah 34. That comes back to a word called Lilith, and of course Lilith was a female Upier and a female god and a blood-sucking demon from the dragon bloodline from the female side, and she's one of the key sort of goddesses that it goes back to, and she was known as a Lamia Upier, and she flew at night like a screech owl, so that's why the word screech owl is in there. That's why owls are so important, as what ravens are in this allegory as well. And a screech owl would hop on one foot like a goat, which where the goat and devil sort of symbology comes from. And so when we connect all of this together, it's not that there are vampires sucking blood as demons out there today. It's more of an allegory of the bloodline. And if you put the fangs on Dracula, taking it back to Vlad the Impaler, who had pale skin, green eyes, didn't go out at night, was considered an Upier, and was initiated in the societies and drank blood to increase his mental faculties. And you take this bloodline back and you put the teeth on the vampire, which is a snake or a cobra or a rattlesnake type teeth, you just sort of complete the allegory. And as you see the vampire stories being developed now, they're turning these vampires from being totally evil to good people, right? To the good side. They're starting to invert it. And if you look at the allegory of vampire stories, it's Christianity against the dragon bloodline, right?
Right. Wasn't Lilith the first wife of Adam? Well,
that's more from a Kabbalistic mythology, even though it will connect back to Sumerian mythology. But that's, from Kabbalism, and it's not clear where Lilith comes from in the Kabbalism. But yes, certainly they say she was the counterpart to Adam before Eve was created. But she didn't want to take a second position to Adam, and so went back and sort of helped with and laughed at the fall of Adam and Eve later. But she goes back to the world of demons and Nephilim. So I actually go a little bit more with the Sumerian version that takes her back as either a Nephilim or a lower level of god that's created in this realm between two other gods or two other fallen angels.
Okay, because we had somebody in chat say asked that question. Also said she would not be subservient, and then Eve was created from Adam instead of Earth like Lilith. So
yeah, and this is where Gnostic Gospels and
Dave.
Sumerian sort of belief sort of comes together, and so Lilith is also thought to be in the Gnostic belief also the wife of either Enki, if you tie him in as a Sumerian god, or of Satan. And also in that sort of line of thought from the Gnostics, they also believe Cain was either the son of Lilith and Satan, or the son of Eve and Satan, or the son of Eve and some other fallen angels. But interesting enough, though, Lilith in Sumerian lore was also married to Samael in other versions, which is another version of Satan. So, yeah, she goes right back as a wind goddess, demon, blood-sucking vampire, witch, you name it. Lots of her history in mythology, no doubt about it.
Okay. But getting back to that, so were you saying that technically vampires they definitely don't exist? Okay, and
it's an allegory.
Okay,
yeah. And it's an occultic allegory.
Okay, so really none of these monsters. I mean, what do you say? Well, technically, let me get back to the gnomes. I mean, are they something that have not continued on in that form? Like, are there gnomes today? I mean, could you see them physically today?
Yeah, I think you could, and I think they are part of this alien mythology, as I said a little bit earlier, right?
Okay.
So there's also been a lot of
how about
archaeology on
Gary?
Discovering of these little people.
Okay.
And they either get written off to some sort of prehistoric hominid of some sort, or the bones and the discoveries just disappear, just like the bones and the discoveries disappear from all of the North American giant discoveries. Yeah. And I know people say, well, that's just another conspiracy story, except that all of these discoveries were recorded in newspapers. Some of them have pictures, some of them have descriptions, some of them have sketches, and all of them have records going back to the Smithsonian.
Oh yeah, I think there's enough. Yeah, I think there's enough evidence out there that totally, we put them away and lock them behind closed doors. For what reason, I really don't know, except for just keeping us dumbed down, I guess, a little bit. But
controlling the information as to how they want to dispense it.
Yeah. But getting back to the gnome again, I'm sorry. The whole little red hat and the way they portray him in some of the the books and stuff like that. I'm only saying this because I technically thought me and my uncle, we saw a gnome just like that. It was a little person dressed just like a gnome you would see out of the cartoons. I was probably 12 years old or so, and that's old enough to know. I mean, I'm not even to this day. I remember it, and he came in the house. Was right around the corner, and we saw him probably for a good 5 seconds, which was long enough, and just darted back behind the door and was gone, disappeared. But totally seen him. Yeah,
and again, there's many different types of portals in fairy mythology, whether or not it's a Shay or a fairy mound or a fairy dolmen, and dolmen means portal. And if people don't know what a fairy dolmen is, imagine a small little structure that kind of looks like Stonehenge. Mm-hmm. These are all over the world, again, without explanation.
Right.
Also, there's the mythology in fairy mythology and alien mythology that they have portals that can come through the water. And so when we talk about some of the names of these locations where these portals would go to, the most common one would be like a Tartarus-type location or an Anwen, which is the same sort of location. And that's why, those places are all throughout these types of mythologies. I mean, it's just, again, too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence.
Right. So your take on, and we'll get back to getting a little deeper here. Your thoughts on like Bigfoot and stuff like that. You believe those are, any ideas on that?
Well, it seems to have a very similar connection to the Nephilim. They seem to be different than Nephilim, but they do live in caves, and Nephilim were also known to live in caves. They seem to be intelligent beings. They're, again, Bigfoot. Mythologies are on all continents around the world. Again, it's again sort of this common sort of knowledge, and there's these beings that are always coming up, whether it's in Lord of the Rings or it's in science fiction or what have you, or an ogre and fairy mythology as an example, which a lot of people believe is a reflection of Bigfoot, to be dismissed. And I live on the West Coast, and I'm very familiar with Bigfoot and Sasquatch, and they've certainly scared a lot of people. So I think there's a very strong possibility that they exist, and I think, again, it's all part of this whole idea that these beings somehow survived the flood, and seemingly with a lot of the little people or a lot of the Bigfoot, somehow, it's got to do with the caves and the portals that they were able to escape through.
Okay, so I mean, it's possible then that they're going back and forth through some kind of portal, and that's why we technically never catch one, or I mean, from everything, all these, Mothman, you name it, anything that's out there that is considered paranormal nowadays that deals with creatures and stuff like that, we just, they go, okay, well, where's the evidence? But if we're going with the Nephilim, it's because they're able to pop in and out, and it's a whole different the fairy folks. So yeah,
it's one thing if you're a spirit being that you can cross these dimensions, but if you're from the physical realm, how do you do that? Well, you have to have some sort of portal or connection or doorway. And I know a Christian will say, you're really getting out there. I'm going, it's irrelevant whether or not it's out there or not, or whether or not I believe it. I believe that there's too much going on to ignore this. But what I do know, this is what the secret societies and the mystical religions planning the end time believe. And what they're doing with this information is really important. And if you do want to make a biblical connection to Tartarus, which is one of the names of these sort of places that they might go, you would go to First Peter, where it talks about Tartarus and Abyss as being the same place.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, I mean, getting to, because we got about 15 minutes here, which is plenty of time, but getting to the actual end days here, why? Can I just ask you that? I mean, between God, the fallen angels, what is the purpose and why the end days? Why are we going to reach this peak and have this happen? Or do you believe it might not happen?
Well, it has to happen because according to the Bible, it's been ordained to happen. Okay. And it will happen on his timetable and when he puts in the restrainer. And it has to come to an end because without it, the world is going to be destroyed with what's going on. And so God steps in and prevents it, but there's going to be great tribulation before that comes about. Again, when we look at why, it's because the other side wants to bring this about. And all the Bible does is predict what the other forces and the descendants of these organizations and giants who are being sponsored by the demons and fallen angels are trying to do. And so in the end time, they want to create that world government, right? They want to create that universal religion, as well as to be able to bring that spark of the divine about so that they can evolve into gods. That's the big prize that they're offering humans. So that's why people are going to be deceived in it. And they want to establish, according to prophecy, and I'll bring this back to secret societies quite quickly, they want to bring the world together into 10 groups of nations or 10 empires, as prophesied in Daniel and in Revelation. And the reason why they want to do that is because they want to recreate the new Atlantis, or the New Age, or the 1,000-year millennium, as they might talk about it, which is, the dream of, in the book that Lord Bacon wrote, which was a great occultist of the Elizabethan time and King James time, and who was the inspirational founder because of this book for the Royal Society, which started the modern age of science. And the reason why it's so popular is because he wanted this new Atlantis that he calls about, and where you have this marriage of this one world government and this universal religion, which is their religion of mysticism that works in harmony, as opposed to how science works with Christianity today. And so people may not understand that Bacon was an occultist and a Rosicrucian. So this is very, very important to understand. Mm-hmm. And when we take that back and that allegory that he's using to Atlantis, Atlantis was not just the island or the continent of Atlantis, as most people understand the mythology. But when you get deeper into the mythology, it was created by Poseidon, who married Clymene, who has 5 sets of twins. So 10 titans who rule over the 10 different empires of the Atlantean world, and they were known as the helm of world government. They didn't conquer the whole world because, as Plato tells us, the Athenians checked them in the antediluvian world, but they were trying to bring the whole world under this golden age that they were going to bring in under Titanic rule. Now, we have the 10 from Atlantis. We have the 10 in prophecy. Let's bring the secret societies back in. So there's this society that's created in the late 60s and starts really moving forward in the early 70s, called the Club of Rome. So it's under there, high up there, higher than Freemasons, but they report directly to the Rosicrucians. Now, their main goal is to bring about world government. And they had decided to divide the world up into, and I'll use several different terms here because you'll see it used in the news and you'll see it assembling. They want 10 different trading blocks, spheres of influence, groups of nations, whatever you want to call it, but they're going to have a collection of nations working together that will send one representative to a council of 10 to run the world. And this is the same group that introduced ideas to help cattle herd this, as well as working with governments, as well as trying to put the infrastructure in place, ideas that will transcend nationalism, because you have to bring nationalism to heal. So they need ideas that are going to unite people that crosses borders. So they introduced in the 70s things like peak oil to cattle herd people into world government, overpopulation, and also ideas like environmentalism, because that one really reaches around the world. But their big one, and I grew up in the 70s going to school, that we were going to be told we were going into an ice age. Yep. Well, they decided that global warming was a better way to get people out there to cattle herd them into world government. So we see their concepts that have been at play since the 70s to more or less drive people into accepting world government, or lest we destroy ourselves from the face of the earth, which is the same message we get in science fiction, and is the same message that happened at Babel, that they had to unite for some reason or be destroyed or removed from the face of the earth. And that's exactly how they're going to cattle herd us, is through fear and cataclysms.
Okay, so end of days technically will not wipe out everybody. It will
No, because after Armageddon, there's a 1,000-year reign of Jesus, and then we go into eternity according to the Bible. It is just the end of this 6,000-year epoch where we're dominated through free choice and through the influence of these fallen angels and demons, so that enough people, whatever that number is, and it's said in the New Testament, so the number of the Gentiles will be fulfilled to go into the future world. Well, whatever that number is, whatever that time is, that's the period that was allowed for this influence of free choice and angels and demons.
Wow. Oh, man. And let me ask you, why? Well, I mean, first of all, is this going to work? I mean, you say it will because it's prophesized, right? So,
yep, that's my belief. Yes, and you can see it assembling. I mean, you see NAFTA, you see the European Economic Community expect that to split in two, and I think this Brexit thing is all part of it. You're going to see a Russian-dominated sphere of influence. You're going to see a China-dominated sphere of influence. There'll be another Asia one. There'll be an African one, and you hear about the African Army and the African Union, and you see this coming together, that there will be this continual movement towards this countries working together, right? And global free trade is one of the key driving forces for that. And certainly it becomes easier to create a world government when you have things like the internet and all the different communication going on.
Right.
And you hear about all of the governments around the world saying the same language: New World Order, working together, bring the borders down. And the UN, it's feckless today. But once it hits a new crucial point, it gets wiped out, and you get this new government that's established with these 10 representatives from the 10 areas.
Okay, so for us humans, who are, what is, going to technically take us down? Is it going to be a number of things? Is it going to be man-made disease? Is it going to be war? I mean, what's going to be the ultimate, thing that takes us down?
Well, the ultimate thing that takes us down is going to be war and rebellion against God. So, and there's going to be lots of other natural disasters in there, as we look at the signs of the times. But the whole thing comes about by trying to work for good causes, not to destroy the earth, not to destroy it through a nuclear catastrophe or environmental catastrophes, and possibly the alien deception. And the Antichrist comes in on a platform of peace, right? So this whole idea is that they're going to introduce this new age, this 1,000-year, or this new golden age of peace and prosperity. But it starts to deteriorate over the last 7 years until you have World War III that breaks out with the Gog War, and that involves this great alliance of peoples that starts with Russia and Middle Eastern countries in invading Israel. And then you have World War III, and that army is destroyed, whether it's by God or through nuclear weapons or by the Americans or a combination of all. But Israel is defended, and the Antichrist gets crowned at that 3.5-year point right afterwards. So we go from this universal religion that has control. We have this global free trade going on, and then all of a sudden, those people who aren't happy with what's going on, who aren't winning in this new order, they go to war, and they invade the Middle East and get defeated. And then you have the reign of the Antichrist, and from there you have this persecution going on with people standing up against the Antichrist. It actually starts in the first 3.5 years with the universal religion. Then you have a second persecution with the Antichrist. So what is promised as this great hope very quickly turns into something that's not good. And then by the end of it, by the midpoint, you have to take the mark of the Antichrist, otherwise you can't buy or sell, which again, the technology is pretty much there today to do, whether it's through a chip or an implant or whatever other means the technology is going to devise, so that they can create this cashless society, which again we can see that's on this horizon. So you can see all of these different things starting to come together, but all through what people think are going to be good intentions. Right. Well, I have to ask you, though, part of the deception.
Well, but most of the population will be destroyed, right?
Oh yeah, a lot of it will be destroyed. It'll be a remnant that survives.
Okay. Well, let me ask you. I can't not ask you who you believe or the Antichrist to be. Do you know? Do you have any idea?
No, because again, you don't know the exact time of the end time. What we do know is that if it comes about through the secret societies and the descendants of the giants, it's going to have a Nephilim bloodline. And what we do know is that the adepts, the very high-end purebloods, they have 3 essential Antichrist-type people at their fingertips all the time, because they will pick any time they can to bring about the end time and bring about the Christ, although there is only one time that will be permitted. But they're trying all the time to do it beforehand, but they'll accept the ordained time. So they've got the super Mensa person initiated into the mysticism and secret knowledge all the time, ready to go. So I would say, if you're going to try and figure out one possibility, certainly the Stuart bloodline would be a significant one, because that was a very ennobled race of coming together of all these different bloodlines, and I'll track that in the book for the people. Okay. But also follow the King of Jerusalem title, which is currently held by the King of Spain. It's not given from father to son. It goes to like a Pendragon title. It goes to the one that they think is quite worthy, because what's important about the King of Jerusalem title is remember that the Antichrist will be crowned in Jerusalem at the abomination, and he also has in the bloodlines of the Benjamite King Saul bloodlines married in there, and I'll detail in that in the book. And what's important about that is that the Benjamites were awarded Jerusalem. And again, that links to why the Templars were involved in Jerusalem, and these whole organizations go back. So watch that King of Jerusalem title, because that's the title that the Antichrist is going to be crowned with.
Wow. Man, I tell you what, Gary, I don't know if you'd be up to it one of these nights here. I would love to, because this is just overwhelming information, and that's why I can't wait to actually read the book, sit down and read the complete book itself. I would love to just have a show just talking about a lot of these secret societies.
Absolutely. There are so many things I cover off in the book that it's easy to do a show on a specific subject.
Very, very good. Well, I mean, I definitely would have to... if you're up for it, I would love to just talk secret societies one night with you. So,
yep,
cool.
Okay,
Sounds good.
We'll schedule another show.
Sounds good. And man, this was—I tell you what, this was awesome. You know, this will be a quick answer, or try to as quick as you can. But I want to ask you just one question, and you could answer it any way you want. Who is God? Can you just answer me or give me an idea?
Nobody can understand what God is.
Okay, there you go. If that's all I wanted to hear. I mean, and
if we knew his name, we wouldn't understand it or be able to pronounce it.
Okay, there you go.
Too big.
Too big. I agree with you. Very, very complex. Very, yeah, man. I tell you what, we could have technically laid this out for like a 4-hour show. There's so much information